have always lived a simple life. My name is Sarah, and at the age of 30, I found myself in a place I never imagined I would be. Life had always been predictable, calm, and comfortable, but an unexpected turn of events changed everything for me. It wasn't something I had planned for or wanted, but it left a lasting mark that I will carry with me forever. Growing up in a strict household, my parents emphasized the importance of discipline and rules over emotional expression. They taught me to focus primarily on my studies and career. And so, I did exactly that. I poured myself into my academics, worked diligently, and earned excellent grades. Eventually, I secured a respectable job as a teacher. But throughout all of this, I never had the time or space to explore my emotions or to build meaningful relationships. By the time I turned 30, I was still a virgin, a fact that weighed heavily on me. It wasn't that I didn't want love or intimacy, I did. In fact, I spent years yearning for a connection that went beyond the superficial. I longed for a bond that was built on mutual understanding, respect, and trust. Over the years, I had been in a few relationships, each starting with hope and optimism. I hoped, maybe this time, things would be different, but with each relationship, I faced the same disappointing outcome. Some men walked away when they realized that I wasn't willing to compromise my values for physical intimacy. First, they would subtly try to persuade me, testing my boundaries, but as time went on, their persistence grew stronger, and they started to pressure me. They made it clear that they believed my worth in the relationship depended on giving in. When I stood my ground, they distanced themselves, and eventually, they left. Other men didn't leave because of the lack of intimacy, but because they simply couldn't understand me. They didn't see the world the way I did, nor did they share the same values. Conversations that began with excitement and hope gradually dissolved into misunderstandings and frustration. It felt as though I was speaking a language no one else could understand. I often felt lonely even when I was surrounded by people. I would watch my friends fall in and out of love, sharing passionate stories of romance and heartbreak, experiences I couldn't relate to. Their teasing words about my choices stung, and sometimes, I couldn't help but question if I was asking for too much. Was my desire to wait for the right person just a foolish dream? There were moments when I doubted myself. Watching my friends experience the ups and downs of relationships made me feel like an outsider. I began to wonder if my ideal of waiting for love was just a fantasy, one that would never come true. And yet, despite the loneliness that often crept in, I still held on to my belief that I was waiting for something real and meaningful. It wasn't about pride or judgment. It was about staying true to who I was. I longed for a relationship built on deep emotional connection, not just physical attraction. But as time passed, those doubts began to creep in. Was I holding out for something that didn't exist? Was I fooling myself, waiting for a perfect connection that would never materialize? Those thoughts haunted me, often whispering in the back of my mind. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to settle for anything less than what I truly wanted. So, at the age of 30, I found myself still waiting not just for love, but for someone who would see me, understand me, and appreciate me for who I truly was. It wasn't an easy path, but deep down, I believed it was the right one for me. There were times when loneliness would slip in like an unwelcome visitor. On quiet nights, I would lie in bed, yearning for the touch of a man, the warmth, the connection, the feeling of being desired. My mind would wander, and I often found myself awake, my thoughts racing with desires I couldn't control. In those moments, I would turn to myself for comfort. I would fulfill the physical longing with my own hands, but I reminded myself that my restraint held value. I believed that maintaining my virginity was a sign of self-respect, a badge of honor that set me apart from the crowd. I convinced myself that I was different, that I valued something deeper than fleeting physical pleasure. But even as I held firm to these beliefs, a small voice inside me began to question them. Was I missing out on something beautiful? Was I too afraid to open myself up to someone? Or was I simply waiting for the right person to come along? I never spoke about these doubts with anyone, friends, family, or even myself. I buried them deep inside. afraid that voicing these concerns would shatter the image I had so carefully built of myself. To the outside world, I appeared confident, self-assured, and well put together. But inside, I felt incomplete, as though there was a part of me missing. Despite all the achievements in my life, there was something I craved, a connection that transcended words and touched the very core of my being. One afternoon, during a break from my busy schedule, I decided to visit a nearby cafe to unwind. As I sat down with a book and a cup of coffee, I noticed a group of young men at the table next to me. They were full of energy and laughter, and their carefree conversation filled the air. But among them, one young man stood out. His name was Daniel, and there was something magnetic about him. Daniel exuded a warmth that was contagious. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, genuine, not arrogant. His laughter was infectious, and his energy seemed to light up the room. I later learned that Daniel was only 20 years old, but he spoke with the kind of passion and ambition that suggested a depth far beyond his years. He was full of dreams, eager to embrace adventure, and optimistic about the future. As I sat in my corner, quietly observing the world around me, Daniel's eyes met mine. I didn't expect him to notice me, a woman in her 30s, sitting alone with a book. But to my surprise, he did. With a smile that seemed both curious and warm, he approached my table. "Hi," he said, his voice light and inviting. "You look like you could use some company. Mind if I join you?" For a moment, I froze. My instinct was to politely decline and retreat into my solitude. But something about his genuine kindness, the way he stood there with confidence yet not pushy, made me hesitate. "Sure," I said softly, nodding. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat across from me. His presence was magnetic, and as we began to talk, I was surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. He asked questions that made me feel seen, truly seen, as though he was interested in knowing the real me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of connection that was real, not superficial. It wasn't just about his charm or energy, it was the way he listened, the way he engaged with me, that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced before. In that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for the connection I had been waiting for. Laughter filled the air, warm and infectious, as Daniel shared his life stories, each one more captivating than the last. His tales were spiced with humor and a mischievous glint in his eyes, making me laugh along, forgetting for a moment the weight of the world outside. As I listened to him, I realized how much I had missed the feeling of simply being at ease. For the first time in years, I could relax and drop the walls I had spent so much time building around myself. There was something about Daniel, a unique quality, that made me forget everything else in the world, even if just for a little while. He wasn't just another young man, someone passing through my life. He was different. Daniel had this rare gift, an innate ability to make those around him feel as though they truly mattered. In that moment, sitting across from him, I felt like I was someone worth paying attention to, someone who wasn't just drifting through life, but was actually seen for who I was. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and his circle of friends became a constant presence in my life. They'd often stop by the cafe where I worked or invite me to join them at casual get-togethers. Initially, I found it odd to spend time with people so much younger than me. There was almost a sense of awkwardness, as though I didn't quite belong. But their zest for life, their enthusiasm and openness, was undeniably refreshing. Daniel, in particular, seemed to have this magnetic energy, making every moment spent with him feel alive. His thoughtfulness was palpable. He listened deeply to my stories and encouraged me to explore new experiences, to step outside my comfort zone. It was through his subtle guidance that I felt a connection unlike any I had ever known before. There was a certain intimacy to it, as if we were forging something unspoken but real. One evening, Daniel invited me to a small gathering at his house to celebrate his birthday. It was a surprise party that his friends had organized, and as I walked into the room, I could feel the warmth of joy radiating from everyone. The music was lively, and the sound of laughter and dancing filled the air. Daniel, with his ever-present grin, asked me to dance. and I found myself swept into the rhythm of the music, moving in ways I hadn't in ages. As we danced, the world around us seemed to fade into the background. His eyes locked with mine, and there was something in his gaze, not judgment, not expectation, but admiration. In that moment, I felt a spark, a connection that made everything else seem distant. It wasn't just the dance or the music. It was the way he made me feel valued, cherished. As the party began to wind down and the chatter from inside the house faded into the background, Daniel and I found ourselves alone on the balcony. The stars above us sparkled like a million tiny lanterns scattered across the vast, dark sky. A cool breeze brushed against our faces, adding to the quiet serenity of the night. The sounds of the party seemed so distant now, as if we were suspended in time, enveloped in our own little world. Daniel leaned against the railing, his eyes searching mine, as though he wanted to uncover the very core of who I was. There was a calmness to his presence, yet a tension between us that was undeniable, as if the very air between us was charged with anticipation. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice low and sincere, "you're amazing. I've never met anyone like you." His words hit me like a wave, unexpected yet profoundly touching. They wrapped around me, warm and comforting, breaking down the walls I had so carefully built around myself. No one had ever spoken to me with such raw honesty, such vulnerability. Felt as though, for the first time in years, someone truly saw me, not just the surface, but the person beneath, the person I had hidden for so long. I looked down, unsure of how to respond, my heart racing. "You hardly know me," I murmured, my voice trembling with an unfamiliar vulnerability. But Daniel shook his head gently, his expression unwavering. "I know enough," he said, his gaze deepening. "I see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you listen, the way you think. You're special, Sarah, and I mean that." His words opened something inside of me, a door I hadn't even realized had been closed for years. We began talking, our voices low, intimate. As the night deepened, we shared pieces of ourselves with each other, revealing parts of our lives, our struggles, our dreams. It felt safe to speak with him, no judgment, just understanding. At some point, emboldened by the honesty of the moment, I found myself sharing something I had never told anyone before. "I've never been with anyone," I confessed, the words hanging in the air like a fragile thread between us. Daniel's expression softened, but he didn't seem surprised. There was no shock, no judgment, only a quiet understanding. "You mean?" he started, but I nodded before he could finish. "Yes," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm a virgin." It wasn't something I planned. It just happened that way. A silence passed between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though the universe itself had paused, waiting for the next breath, the next step. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice steady and filled with kindness. "I think that's beautiful," he said softly. "It shows that you've stayed true to yourself." I looked at him, and for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the desire that had been buried deep inside for so long. "But tonight," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "I don't want to be alone anymore. I want to feel close to someone." There was so much meaning behind my words. And Daniel, without hesitation, understood. He reached out, taking my hand in his, and in that simple gesture, I felt something stir within me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. "Only if you're sure," he said gently, his voice filled with care. In that moment, as the stars twinkled above us and the cool night air wrapped around us like a soft blanket, I felt a shift inside. The years of hesitation, of fear, of holding back, they all seemed irrelevant now. Sitting there with Daniel, I realized that I was finally ready to let go. The walls that had once felt so necessary began to crumble, replaced by a sense of freedom and openness I had never known before. He stood, extending his hand toward me. Without a second thought, I took it, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver of anticipation through me. We walked together, leaving the balcony behind, the sounds of the party growing fainter as we entered a quiet room. It was simple, dimly lit. But in that moment, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where time slowed, and the world outside ceased to exist. Daniel closed the door softly behind us and turned to face me. There was a mix of nervousness and excitement in his eyes, but his movements were gentle, unhurried. He didn't want to break the fragile magic of the moment. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low, tender, his eyes searching mine for any sign of doubt. I nodded, my heart racing in my chest, but my voice was steady. "I've never been more sure," I whispered, and I meant it. What happened next was beyond anything I had imagined. There was no awkwardness, no discomfort, only an overwhelming sense of connection and trust. Daniel's touch was soft, tender, his every movement considerate, wanting to make sure I felt safe and cherished. As we explored this new territory together, I found myself letting go of all the fears and insecurities that had once held me back. For the first time, I felt truly alive, truly connected, and completely in the moment. To my surprise, every moment, every touch, every whispered word felt like a revelation. It wasn't just about the physicality of it, though that too was exhilarating. It was about the emotional awakening, the connection, the deep understanding, the vulnerability we shared. With Daniel, I felt more than just seen. I felt understood, cherished, and alive in a way I hadn't known possible. Despite his eagerness, Daniel's focus was entirely on making sure I was comfortable and happy. He was attentive, caring, and thoughtful, constantly checking in, making sure I felt safe, making sure I was truly enjoying the experience. And I was. Every moment, every touch, felt like it was unfolding exactly as it was meant to. Experiencing the greater joy was something I had spent so many years imagining, a dream I could never quite grasp. The fantasy of it danced in my mind for ages, but when it finally became reality, the feeling was beyond anything I had ever dreamed of. The emotions were far richer, deeper, and more vivid than I could have ever anticipated. It was as if the universe had opened a door to a new realm of existence, one I hadn't even known existed. By the time it was over, I found myself lying beside him, a smile slowly tugging at my lips. There was a warmth inside me, radiating in every part of my being, a warmth I had never experienced before. It was the kind of feeling that settled into your bones and made you feel like you were home. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had taken a step I never imagined I would, a step I thought was reserved for the brave or the naive. Yet, I had done it on my own terms, in my own time, with someone who made me feel not only cherished but also deeply safe, respected, and valued. In that moment of quiet intimacy, the world seemed to stand still. I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that I would carry this experience with me for the rest of my life. It was a memory of not just a physical connection but of finally letting go, of embracing the fullness of life with no apologies. That night was more than a moment. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one I had not even begun to imagine. My feelings for Daniel deepened, growing stronger with each passing day. And as our bond solidified, I realized with overwhelming clarity that the feelings were mutual. He cared for me just as much as I cared for him. Yet, within this blossoming relationship, there was an unsettling thought that clouded my mind. Daniel was so much younger than me. He was 10 years younger, a whole decade, and I couldn't ignore the weight of that fact. As we continued to navigate this new chapter, the age difference often played on my mind, creating moments of doubt. However, Daniel's unwavering sincerity and kindness made it incredibly difficult to resist. His heart was genuine, and in the depths of his words and actions, I could sense a maturity that defied his years. One evening, while we were walking through the park, a peaceful silence between us, he reached for my hand. When our fingers intertwined for the first time, my heart skipped a beat. The sensation of his touch was electric, sending warmth and joy flooding through me in a way I could never have imagined. "Sarah," he said softly, breaking the silence, "I want you to know something important. You're incredibly special to me. I don't care about the age difference. You make me so happy, and that's what matters most to me." His words struck me deep, resonating in the very core of my being. That moment, I realized that my affection for him ran much deeper than I had ever anticipated. However, a twinge of fear remained, fear that I couldn't shake. What would others think? Would people judge me for being in a relationship with someone younger? The weight of society's expectations loomed large. But despite this, the truth was undeniable. I cared for him deeply. As our relationship blossomed, the voices of doubt around me grew louder. Friends and family, those I trusted and respected, questioned our relationship. The constant barrage of criticism was tough to bear. Some told me I was being foolish, that a relationship with someone so much younger would never work. Others whispered about Daniel's intentions, casting shadows of doubt on his sincerity. Their words hurt more than I cared to admit. But through it all, Daniel remained steadfast, standing by my side with quiet strength. "We know how we feel about each other," he reassured me, his voice calm and unwavering. "That's what matters. Don't let anyone else's opinion change what we have." His support gave me the strength to rise above the criticism. Slowly, I learned that love was not something to be explained or justified to others. It was something to be felt and experienced. Through Daniel, I learned the importance of living in the moment, of embracing happiness without guilt or shame. Our love was not about perfection, it was about being together, discovering life, and accepting one another for who we truly were. Being with Daniel was not just about love, it was about transformation. He helped me see myself in ways I had never done before. He showed me how to shed the fears and insecurities that had bound me for years. For the first time in my life, I felt truly beautiful, confident, and valued, not for the roles I had to play in others' lives, but for the person I was becoming. Daniel's belief in me was the spark I needed to rekindle my own belief in myself. With him, I was learning how to live fully, without holding back. One evening, we found ourselves sitting under a blanket of stars, the night air cool around us. Daniel turned to me, his eyes reflecting the same light that twinkled above. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "you've changed my life in so many ways. I'll always treasure the moments we've shared." His words, so sincere and full of love, brought tears to my eyes. I knew that no matter where life took us, the memories we had created would remain etched in my heart forever. Our time together had been nothing short of magical, and I would forever be grateful for the love we shared. But, as life often goes, the tides of time moved us in different directions. Daniel was about to move to another city to pursue his studies, and I, too, had my own life and responsibilities to tend to. After many heartfelt discussions, we made the difficult decision to part ways. Though it was painful, we chose to embrace the joy of the time we had spent together, rather than mourn its end. Our relationship, though brief, taught me more than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just about love, it was about courage, self-discovery, and the power of living authentically. Looking back, I see that meeting Daniel was a turning point in my life, one that I would not trade for anything. He awakened parts of me I didn't even know existed, and through him, I discovered the transformative power of love. At 30, I never imagined that a 20-year-old would have such a profound impact on me. But life, in all its unpredictability, often brings lessons in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes, the most profound connections come from the most unlikely sources. And through it all, I've learned that love knows no boundaries, not in age, status, or expectations. To anyone who might question or judge my story, I have one thing to say: love transcends all. Daniel and I may have gone our separate ways, but the love we shared, the lessons he taught me, and the joy he brought into my life will forever remain in my heart. This experience has reminded me that life is far too short to allow fear or doubt to hold us back. Embrace the unexpected, savor the moments that bring you happiness, and never be afraid to follow your heart. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters in life are the ones we never saw coming. Thank you for taking the time to watch our videos. If you find the content useful and interesting, don't forget to like, share, and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Our channel will always update attractive, inspiring, and useful content for you. Click the bell icon to receive notifications as soon as there are new videos. Your support is the biggest motivation for us to continue to develop. Thank you and see you in the next videos.